Hey, my name's Marie. I'm here to this time rant a little bit about question five. I know that I promised I would make other videos that are a little more educational and informative, but right now I'm just so mad. I'm just so mad. Please look at this.
So, what we're looking at here is the Office of Campaign and Political Finance public data set specifically filtered for contributions to the Committee to Protect Tips in the amount of at least $5,000. As we scroll through, you can see there are a lot of really hefty contributions here. In particular, there are a lot from the Massachusetts Restaurant Association, which you may note that they're in kind contributions and not direct monetary contributions. So, this means that rather than giving funds directly, they're donating staff time, labor, actual work on the campaign. They still have to list that monetary value. Otherwise, we're seeing a lot of big contributions from huge national chains, and we're also seeing some local restaurant groups and even some individual owners giving pretty massive contributions here. So, right off the bat, we can see that there have been $500,000 donated to the No on 5 campaign from Darden Corporation. Darden is the parent company of Olive Garden, Longhorn Steakhouse, Yard House, and the Capitol Grill. Same thing here. This is the largest franchisee for Applebee's restaurants in the country. They have donated $75,000 again to the No on 5 campaign so that they would not have to pay that full minimum wage to tipped workers. Brinker International is another large chain. They're known primarily for Chili's. They've donated $20,000. And now we also see a couple of big contributions from more local companies. So this Hampshire House Corporation has donated $50,000. But wait, the owner himself has individually contributed $200,000 of his own money trying to prevent this from going into law. So these are the folks who own Cheers in Boston, a couple other kind of schmancy restaurants, obviously really trying to keep that profit margin high to the point that he has $250,000 to dump into a campaign when he feels like it.
So, this is where I got thinking. If someone has that much money to dump into a campaign to prevent them from having to spend that very same money on their workers, how many labor hours would that actually be? So I did some math. 25,000 labor hours. That's how much. So the way I figured out these labor hours was basically just thinking, if these employers are paying $6.75 an hour now and the full minimum wage is $15 an hour and they're saying, "Oh, we can't afford that $8 increase." That's what I based it on. So these labor hours aren't at $15 an hour, they're at $8 an hour, which is approximately the difference between the tipped minimum wage and the regular minimum wage, or basically the same rate as the tip credit is.
Legal Seafoods donated $20,000 to the No on 5 campaign, which is the equivalent of 2,500 labor hours.
Steve DiFilippo here, the owner of Davio's, personally could have bought 6,250 labor hours with his $50,000.
Turner's Seafood, a little group of restaurants up on the North Shore, donated $10,000, the equivalent of 1,250 labor hours.
Doug Bacon, who is the director for the Massachusetts Restaurant Association and also a leader of the Committee to Protect Tips. He has the Red Paint Hospitality Group, but for some reason they don't have a website. Anyway, he personally donated $65,304 to this, the equivalent of 8,163 labor hours at the full minimum wage.
Sylvan Street Grill spent $25,000. That is the equivalent of 3,125 labor hours. The Columbus Hospitality Group spent $5,000 in the name of each of their restaurants for a total of $30,000, equaling 3,750 labor hours. The Broadway Restaurant Group, which owns a handful of restaurants out here in the Boston area, spent $50,000 or the equivalent of 6,250 labor hours. Darden here again with their big spending. That $500,000 is the equivalent of 62,500 labor hours. if they were to bring up their tipped workers to the full minimum wage. Back here again to Chili's, etc., $20,000 contribution equals 2,500 labor hours. Koji, which is a big restaurant group in Boston, which has several different concepts and locations, donated $50,000, the equivalent of 6,250 labor hours. Viscariello Hospitality Group out in Plymouth, which has, it looks like, 5 different restaurants, donated $16,000, which they could have used to bring tipped workers up to the full minimum wage for a total of 2,000 hours.
The Breyer Restaurant Group, which owns a good handful of restaurants, also donated $50,000 to the cause. Again, another 6,250 labor hours.
And then we have Fiorella's out in Belmont spending $10,000 to prevent tipped workers from making a full minimum wage paid by the employer. That could have been better spent on 1,250 labor hours. We've got Glynn Hospitality also with $10,000 that could have been spent on 1,250 labor hours to bring up tipped workers to the full minimum wage. And here we've got Encore with $25,000, another 3,125 hours this could have been spent on their employees.
Here again, we've got this big Applebee's franchisee. He spent $75,000 fighting against the proposed ballot measure, which could have been spent instead on 9,375 labor hours, bringing tipped workers up to the full minimum wage. From Burton's Grill, the campaign received $25,000, which again is over another 3,000 labor hours that money could have been spent on. Last, we have Anna's Taqueria, which is sort of an interesting case. They spent $25,000 preventing workers from making the full minimum wage paid by their employers, the equivalent of 3,125 labor hours. Now, Anna's is actually counter service, so it's one that we might actually assume is already paying the $15 an hour. But by contributing this much, what that tells me is that they've discovered they actually don't have to pay that full minimum wage under the current law as long as their workers are making tips. So Anna's, I would assume, is taking a tip credit, even though it's not a traditional full service restaurant. This is what the law is leaving us open to, the depression of wages, as Anna's is probably demonstrating here. So as a final wrap up, let's take a look at the winners here. Great job, fellas!
Woohoo! Yay!